So hi there, Professor. I am definitely not in a classroom, but I'm going to pretend like I am and give my little presentation here. Um, I found an article that I'm presenting on that touches on five important administration issues in the church. And those five are the protection of children and youth, the financial side of ministry, common legal issues, religious freedom issues, and church property matters. So first off, the protection of children and youth. Um, or every year for many years, there's been allegations of sexual abuse involving minors, and it's not seeming to ever stop. So unfortunately, that's something that we have to think about. And every pastor must take this threat seriously. Um, Churches cannot we cannot create impenetrable defenses, but we can certainly take several important steps that can at least demonstrate good faith and promote a safe and healthy environment for our kids. And of course, if we're not showing that the kids are safe in church, no one's going to want to come. If we can be in place importance on them, we'll be able to see growth because families aren't going to worry about it, and they're going to be like, "Wow, I can come to this church and relax a little bit with knowing that my kids are safe." And so um, those those steps that I just mentioned are first of all having a comprehensive written protection plan for children that is followed by the church's leadership. Um, and there's either ones you maybe hire outside for an attorney to put up or to figure out, or there's many pre-made ones that are good. And my church certainly has those already in place. Um, and a matter of fact, we are expanding that to include not just background checks, but fingerprinting, and just another level of vetting, I guess you would say. But then also a thorough application, screening, and selection process for anyone in the church, which kind of touches on the first thing I just said. So if for anybody that touches, not touches, but deals with children or youth, and anyone under 18 needs to go through a process of vetting. Um, and then another step is having a response plan in case an allegation arises. A plan that would address how to respond to the victim, um, both the victim and the accused individual, and having something in place to help you go through that. So when the issue, God forbid, does come up, you're not really caught with your tail between your legs, so to speak, and not knowing what exactly to say and do in that situation. Um, and then finally, having a mandatory annual training of all staff and volunteers to go over the best practices that would include the child protection plan and an abuse response plan. And so, second, the financial side of ministry, the dollars and cents, so to speak. There's budgets, taxes, fraud prevention, compensation. Uh, all that stuff is not just a matter of a certified accountant or whatever, but something that pastors have to think about. We have to have wisdom and discernment when it comes to finances. And we're not going to be experts like a CPA might be or something like that, but we need to have a working knowledge of all those aspects. So some steps for that would be knowing what type of budget calendar the church uses, and noting when budgets must be planned, renewed, and approved. Pastors should help reinforce this process so that staff and volunteers know what they need to do and when they need to do it. And then next, you need to make certain the church's vision and mission. If you're not solidified in vision and mission, people perish for lack of vision, right? And so the churches shouldn't be expected to go much farther either without a vision. And so there's a person named Michael Batts says in the church finance publication that budgeting starts with all of this. We have to set our churches up for financial success first by having a vision and mission in place. And then the third step is asking for a simple, visually driven financial report, including ones that show giving and expense trends and then read them. Our church does this through an annual business meeting, in which we list out all of the finances and all that stuff of the year. But then we also have an open book policy. So if someone does have a question, we are absolutely required to answer it and let people in, to see what their tithing goes towards and all that stuff. And then a fourth step is understanding the dual tax status of ministers, which is something that we definitely don't think about a whole lot, I don't think. And when I say that, it's the fact that most are self-employed when it comes to paying Social Security and Medicare, but they're treated as employees in most other instances. So that means like being mindful of housing allowances, and all the other kind of like odd tax situations that pastors will come across. And then I believe that's a fifth step in the financial side of things, is encouraging sound internal controls so that no one person has an unsupervised control over either spending or just the money in tithe and stuff. For example, my church, we absolutely cannot, the person who collects the offerings absolutely cannot take them up and drop them off in our safe without somebody else. It doesn't necessarily matter who that other person is, but there has to be a second person there for accountability. So things like that. And then finally, in our financial section is knowing that the personnel often represents the largest expense for churches, and recognizing that most in ministry are not overpaid. Fair compensation is a real challenge that we have to be willing to address so that budgets are handled well and pastors and staff aren't struggling to make ends meet. Have that balance. And then third, we have just understanding common legal issues as administrators and pastors. We are free to choose our pastors, clergy, and ministers, but the government may or may not consider those individuals to be pastors, clergy, or ministers for tax purposes. And nevertheless, it's important for churches to understand how our staff is viewed when it comes to those situations, so that none of us are put into an legal issues and stuff in tax with the federal government. We definitely don't want that. And so, in addition to just finance issues and those legal matters, we also need to be familiar with our clergy penitent privilege law, it says, or as it's called. We have to exercise extreme caution before signing any contracts on the church's behalf. We have to understand that the work we put into sermons on church time and using equipment means that the church owns the sermons. Something we don't think about. And records also matter to pastors and administrators. We have to understand how our church was formed, meaning that we have to read the church's character, constitution, bylaws, and all those kind of things, so that we know how the church operates, and where certain legal things might land and for who's responsible and so on and things like that. And then moving on to the fourth section, I'm trying to keep it around 10 minutes. We'll see how it goes. Are issues of religious freedom. The First Amendment guarantees religious freedom for churches, right? And these protections have been reinforced in recent years, including a decision barring civil courts from intervening in employment disputes between churches and clergy, and a majority decision protecting the free speech rights of churches. So that's a good thing. And in regard to federal statutes, churches have special treatments, noting here in my notes where we have Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, for example, prohibits the discrimination of employees, but churches at the same time can discriminate on the basis of religion. So that means churches are exempt from the so-called contraceptive mandate required of employees by the Affordable Care Act. And we also see that like in Hobby Lobby, where they didn't want to provide medication for. Honestly, I'm kind of spacing on what that was, but those issues in understanding the difference between like when you're a religious body, how does that either add or subtract from certain laws, and where you sit and all that, needing to understand that. But then there's also like zoning laws, for example, that can lead to disputes between churches and municipalities, because of certain activities that churches want to do on their property. And so there's been laws passed to preserve the rights of churches, but there's still issues with zoning lawsuits, unfortunately. So I guess that's to say, understanding that some of the religious freedom stuff, we have certain exemptions that other businesses won't have, which is a good thing. And marriage is another challenge in that. In June 2015, the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex couples have the protected right to marry. But at the same time, it also continues to protect the rights of clergy to decide whom they wish to marry. So that remains unchanged. And so you can see that there's, this is all very recent, but understanding where we sit with religious freedom is very, very important. And finally, matters of church property, which is a not so glamorous one, but that comes down to, for example, lending. If a church needs a loan, the pastor should understand the process. And if a church already has a loan, it's important for us to understand the terms and contracts that the church has to meet. Excuse me. And then also insurance coverage. Disputes with insurers are another top reason that churches go to court every year. We have to understand the coverage that our church possesses and what special coverages might be necessary to cover certain risks, such as stuff like water damage, or kind of touching on earlier, unfortunate like allegations of abuse and employment matters. We should really form committees to cover our insurance, to regularly review coverages and pricing, to make sure that all those ends or all those dots or I's are dotted and T's are crossed, you know. And then also facility use. Really, like, what does it mean? What is the process if we want to use our facility for other things? Like, for example, our church rents our facility for lots of different things. Once a week we have a homeschool comes and has classes. So we need to understand the contracts of that and how that works, and then also how are we at the limits and stuff of what we can get paid for all of that, and how that ties in because we're a nonprofit and so on. And that also goes back to insurance. And then also unrelated income. We might, churches might host festivals that are sponsored by businesses, or we might have in our case, have a coffee shop. So we have to know, is that stuff taxable? Is it not? We need to be familiar with all activities on church property that generates some sort of income, so that we can determine if we owe unrelated business income tax. And then also slips, trips, and falls. Personal injuries, basically. It's another huge reason why churches go to court every year. And it happens. I mean, that's going to be anywhere. But basically ensuring that we have proper maintenance of the church building and grounds, because we can get in some big trouble if someone got hurt because of something that we didn't maintain, for example. And then also safety teams. We should consider forming teams that consist of staff and volunteers that are passionate about safety, to make sure that these areas are safe, and make sure that maybe there's people for first aid and so on and so forth. Like, we have a security team that not only tries to protect our property and our people, but also that are trained in first aid and are able to be first responders, at least some of us. So that's pretty much what I have. That was a whole lot. I fit into 14 minutes or about 15 minutes, but that was just some research I found on just some administration issues that we should know and consider, but don't always isn't always at the forefront of our brains when we think about church administration. I especially, before this class thought church administration. Well, that's counting the people, counting the money, and ordering office supplies. I guess like I did not have anywhere near the same understanding as I do now, and so I just wanted to present on 5 areas that we may not consider a whole lot when it comes to church administration. And that concludes it. And Professor Hartley, I am praying for you, and I hope you have a quick and speedy recovery. And even though we only met a couple times, it is always very, very fruitful for me. And I always look forward to our meetings and any kind of conversation we have. So, love you and appreciate you. You have a great break. Bye.